your Spirit would be at work now in our hearts. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, on November 5th, 2020, a 6-year-old girl was brought to the emergency room by her mother, and she was complaining about pain in her right ear. Her mother said she thought that maybe her daughter had put a pinto bean into her ear. The doctor used an otoscope to look into the ear canal, and sure enough, there was a pinto bean completely blocking her right ear. Well, no wonder it hurt, right? Since the doctor was able to get a good visual of the bean, he was able to take a pair of tweezers and insert them into her ear and get hold of that bean and take it out. And other than a small scratch, which healed on its own, there was no lasting harm. Now, there's a couple of lessons here for us today. This is not really the point of the sermon, okay, but it's an illustration to get us started, okay? The first one, though, it should be obvious. Don't put beans in your ears, okay? This is usually more of a problem for little kids. So little kids here today, if you're a child here today, do not put beans or anything else, for that matter, in your nose or your ears, right? That's not where they belong. Your mouth is fine, but otherwise, don't put them in there, okay? The other lesson, though, is a little bit different. Now, it is certainly possible for you to block up your ear canals so that you're unable to hear. I mean, that's pretty much how earplugs work, right? We use them when we're using loud machinery, or maybe we're out shooting guns, or trying to sleep at the men's retreat at Camp Shatek. But plug for that, by the way, it's not till January, but guys, just telling you right now, you can prepare for that and plan to join us at that. Anyways, if you plug your ears from the outside, you won't hear things that are being spoken. But that's not the only way to make yourself functionally deaf. In fact, plugging your ears are really the easiest impediments to hearing, the easiest ones to fix. The more difficult problem when it comes to hearing doesn't really have to do with your ears. It has to do with your heart. So look with me at Proverbs chapter 22, or rather, we're going to be in Proverbs 23 this morning. But in Proverbs, beginning at chapter 22, verse 17, and going all the way into chapter 24, verse 22, it contains what are called the words of the wise. This is a series of sayings that may have originated with someone other than Solomon. We talked about this last week just a little bit. Several someones, for that matter. But Solomon is the one who collected them together, organized them for us here under the direction of the Holy Spirit. And so this morning we're going to take a look at the second part of these sayings, the words of the wise, in chapter 23, verses 12 through 35. Now, in one sense, all of the book of Proverbs is written from the perspective of a father to his sons. But this particular passage this morning that we're going to look at is especially focused on the home. What is the most important thing for a young man or a young woman? And the answer to that, you might think of lots of things. But Solomon's answer, and I would argue this is the right answer according to Scripture, and it encapsulates all of the other good answers we might give. Solomon's answer is this: the most important thing for a young man or young woman is to be wise. Remember what Solomon already said. In Proverbs chapter 9, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. To be wise, then, is to walk in humble obedience to God. To be wise is to follow God's path, His way of life, His truth, if you will. Even when the world says otherwise, and get this, and this is really important, even when our own hearts say otherwise. Even when your own heart, your own mind says to do something else, wisdom is to follow God's truth, God's way, regardless of what anyone else says, including you and me. This is the very center of what it means to be a Christian. We recognize that we are sinners. You see, our greatest problem isn't other people. Our greatest problem isn't the system. Our greatest problem is our sin. our rebellion against our Maker. And to be a Christian then is to humble yourself, confess that you are guilty and worthy of judgment. Now, Psalm 51 says that God does not despise a broken and contrite heart. So when we come to God in this way, when we humble ourselves and we come to God and we confess, I am a sinner, I have sinned against you, I have rebelled, I have defied you, I have disobeyed you, I have ignored you, I have gone my own way. When I confess that to God, He doesn't cast me aside. He won't cast you aside. In fact, He receives us and He comforts us. And He does this all because of His one and only Son, Jesus, who died for us, who rose again, ascended to heaven, and He did that so that you and I could be forgiven, so that God could be merciful to us as sinners. Now, this is the background. So I'm sharing this because this is important for us to understand. You're going to read the book of Proverbs. So much of Proverbs looks like just practical life advice, but we have to understand it in the context of a relationship with God. And this relationship is only based on the work and person of Jesus Christ. So if you don't know Jesus Christ as your Savior, if you don't have fellowship with God through Jesus Christ, then Proverbs will not help you. In fact, it will kill you, because you cannot live wisely in this world if you do not first humble yourself and learn to fear the Lord. That's what Solomon says. This is the background. You have to humble yourselves and come to God through Jesus Christ. And when you do, you have the promise that He has forgiven you and granted you the status of son or daughter. So in light of that, look with me at Proverbs chapter 3, and beginning in verse 12. Notice what he says. Apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. Listen, hear this, by the way, hear this from the voice of a father to his son. Father speaking to his son. Apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice. Indeed, I myself, yes, my inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak right things. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day. For surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. Now you might think that hearing is all about the ear. And of course it's true, you need to have ears in order to hear. If you're born without ears, you're not going to be able to hear. If you're born and some part of your ear is not functioning properly, you're not going to be able to hear. But it's more than that. God designed our bodies in a very intricate way. Hearing is not just about the physical structure of the ear. Hearing requires more than that. It requires a functioning auditory nerve. That auditory nerve takes the sound vibrations that come into your ear and it converts them into electrical energy and it transmits them into your brain. And so you actually have to have a brain that can receive that data and process that data. But even that's really only part of it. And the reason I know that is we have a thing that we call selective hearing. Okay? You might be familiar with that. For Christmas, I received a t-shirt that says, I have selective hearing. I'm sorry you weren't selected. I don't remember if my kids gave that to me. Was that from them? Okay, probably. You see, it's not just the physical ability to hear and interpret sounds, right? It's the willingness to hear, to pay attention, to actually listen to what someone is saying or what's going on around you. This is the problem that Solomon addresses first. We'll see if this is going to work here. First thing that he tells us here is this. A wise son or daughter listens with his ears and his heart. You have to listen with your ears and your heart. Notice how the two, ears and heart, are connected. This goes all the way back to the beginning of the words of the wise, chapter 22, verse 17. He says, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. Then again, chapter 23, verse 12, as we just read, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. There's a connection here between the ears and the heart. It's not enough to just hear the words of truth with your ears. Anyone can do that. The truly wise son takes heed to what he hears. He actually opens his heart to receive knowledge and insight and applies it to his heart. I'm afraid this is something we're just not very good at. Applying our heart to wise words. Now, I've spent a number of years teaching high school math, more than a decade, all told. And I've lost count of the number of times that a student has said to me, I just don't get it. Maybe you said that to your math teacher at some point. I just don't get it. Okay. But when a student says that to me, I look down at their paper and I see a blank page. Okay? I see that they've not worked out a single problem. What that tells me is they've not applied their heart to instruction. What's the difference? The difference is you study like your life depends on it. You sit down in that math class and you listen to every word the teacher says, not just copying down examples, but genuinely trying to understand. You read through the textbook. This, by the way, radical idea that after more than a decade of teaching high school math, I have yet to see a student actually do. So take that for what it's worth. Actually, read the textbook and try, and by the way, and think, actually think. We're really, man, there's so many things. We're so bad at this. We just are. We are so, and I don't just mean kids in high school. I mean all of us. Man, we just don't think. We're too busy to think. We don't ever stop and slow down and actually think about something, actually meditate on it and allow our mind to work through the process. If you want to understand algebra, that's what you need to do. If you want to gain wisdom, Solomon says you need to apply your heart. Think about the young man who's just begun a new relationship with a young lady. He wants to study her. He wants to understand everything that he can about her. That's what it means to apply your heart to instruction and your ears to knowledge. And Solomon says, son, apply your heart. This is not something you can do quickly. It's not something you can do and get over with in 5 minutes. This takes a commitment of time and effort. You're going to have to keep working at it. It's an internal disposition that results in certain specific outward actions and characteristics. So we say, that guy is head over heels for that girl. Well, that's how you need to be when it comes to wisdom. Do you want to have wisdom from God? Then you have to love it. You have to go after it with everything you've got. No holding back. It's not going to be easy. Because when you go after wisdom from God, it's going to hit you right between the eyes. Wisdom from God is going to confront your idols. Wisdom is going to confront your ideas of how the world works. It's going to make you unpopular. Because wisdom from God runs contrary to the wisdom of this world. So you want an example? Look at the loony stuff that Solomon tells us here. Look at verse 13. This is absolutely crazy. Wacko out there in left field. Do not withhold correction from a child. For if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Okay, now it's hard to imagine, I know, it's hard to imagine that they had gentle parenting in Solomon's day, but apparently they did. Because what does he say? Don't withhold correction from a child. This means there were people in Solomon's day, 3,000 years ago, there were people who didn't want to tell their kids no and make it stick. They didn't want to offer correction. There were people in Solomon's day saying, don't spank your kids, it will hurt them. Because he says, if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Now, whatever you think Solomon's talking about here, he's not advocating violence or cruelty toward your kids, because that would potentially kill them. And he's saying, no, that's not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about violence or injuring your children. What he's saying is that good parental discipline doesn't hurt them. Good parental discipline is not cruel. So he's actually giving us guidelines here about what this should look like. But he's telling us we got to do it. In fact, what's cruel, he says, is withholding discipline and correction, because if you withhold discipline and correction from your child, he says that's how your kid ends up in Sheol. New King James translates to hell. It means the grave. That's how your child ends up dead. When you withhold correction and instruction, when you don't discipline. It's a good recipe to destroy your child, he says. Charles Bridges was right. He said this, parents no less than children are foolish. We too need correcting. This modern pushback against firm and loving parental discipline is not modern at all, actually, and it's not wise. Solomon is very clear on this. Apply your heart to wisdom, not just your ears. So Bridges says this with respect to these verses. He says, persevere with discipline, even when the results look unpromising. Link this discipline with prayer, faith, and careful instruction. This will not make you friends with the world. What Solomon is telling us here, the wisdom he's advocating for here, is going to run contrary to what you will hear. It won't make you popular. But it will pay off huge dividends for your own children. There's another one here that he gives us that won't make us very popular. Runs contrary to much of our thinking. Verse 17. He says, do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day, for surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. There was a man who served as one of King David's choir directors. His name was Asaph. He wrote several psalms, and Psalm 73 is one that he wrote. And he says there that he looked around and he saw wicked people who were prospering. They were doing well financially. Everything was going well for them. And he says he almost gave up. He became envious of them. Here's what he said. They are not in trouble as other men. They are not plagued like other men. But then, he says he came into the sanctuary, into the holy place of God. And his perspective changed. He says this, surely, Lord, you set them, referring to the wicked, in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Oh, how they are brought to desolation as in a moment. They are utterly consumed with terrors. Now that's the same message we find right here in these two verses, 17 and 18, in this proverb. Don't envy the wicked. Don't follow the ways of the wicked. Don't try to copy the lifestyle of the wicked and unbelieving people in the world. Don't value the things they value. Now I have a question. If you listen and you practice this, is this going to make you popular? No, you're going to be out of step with all of the people around you. You're going to stand out. You might even make some enemies because they will realize that you don't live for pleasure or money or the weekend or whatever idol it is that they are currently chasing. And your life is not about that stuff. You'll be out of step with them. You won't fit in. But think about the end. That's what Solomon is telling us here. Where does life lead? I know this is something we Americans don't like to face. We don't like to face death. I've done enough funerals in my 15 years as a pastor to see a lot of people work very hard to try to avoid thinking about death. We don't even have funerals anymore. We call them celebrations of life. That's rubbish. Don't lie. Don't lie about this. This is real. Death is real. Part of the reason we don't want to think about death is we don't want to think about what comes next. What does Solomon say here in verse 18? For surely there is a hereafter. Again, there's a popular lie, a popular mythology that says there's nothing after this. That's not a new thing, okay? Someone tells you this new cutting-edge idea that there's nothing after this. That's not a new thing. Solomon was dealing with this. No. Solomon says there is a hereafter. You're going somewhere after this life is over. And it would be wise for you to prepare for that. The foolish thing to do is to pretend it doesn't exist and stick your head in the sand and refuse to talk about it. That's where we're at in America today, by the way, for the most part. It's frustrating to me when I do funerals with people and I try to help them to understand. Yes, we want to grieve this person that you've lost. That's important. But we also need to take the time to stop and think about the fact that every one of us is going to go in the same place eventually. We're all going to end up being the one in the box that everybody comes to look at. I'm not saying that that's not pleasant. That's real. And we better deal with it. And you better be prepared for that because it's going to happen someday. And then what comes after that? That's the thing that matters. Solomon says you got to think hard about the path that you're on. Do not do this casually. Don't take this lightly. If you're envious of sinners, what's the alternative? He says the alternative is to be zealous or passionate about fearing the Lord. You know what it means to be passionate about something. You all know the guy who's passionate about football. Can't wait to talk about the Packers, even though it's just preseason. You just wind him up and let him go, and he can go for an hour. You don't even have to interrupt him. You just let him go, right? And he knows all the players and all the statistics, and he can tell you all the what-ifs. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying you know what it means to be passionate about something. And Solomon says, instead of being envious of the wicked, you need to be passionate, zealous when it comes to the fear of the Lord, to following God, to loving what He loves and hating what He hates, to investing our lives for eternity. Jesus talks about this, and He uses a very simple analogy. He says it's laying up treasure in heaven. It's living the here and now in light of the hereafter. Where did Jesus get that from? Well, Solomon may have been one of the influences here because he certainly read the Bible. Solomon said you better prepare for the hereafter. And Jesus said the same thing. So we've got to listen with our ears and with your heart. But there's a problem because the heart is a tricky thing. Solomon knew that. In fact, Solomon probably understood that better than anybody else in history apart from Jesus. He realized that the heart cannot be trusted. So don't just listen with your ear and your heart. Here's the next thing. You got to lead your heart in the right way. You got to lead your heart in the right way. Don't follow it. Look at verse 19. He says, "Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix with winebibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Also, wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. The world says, follow your heart. Let your heart lead the way. Listen to your heart. Follow your bliss. Do what your heart tells you is right. Your heart knows the way. Only do what your heart tells you. That last one, by the way, it's a quotation, someone famous, Princess Diana. Some of you may be old enough to remember her. Some of you maybe not, actually. I got to know my audience here. Okay. If you're old enough to remember Princess Diana, you know how things ended up for her. And I'm not saying the things like that, the things that happened to her were her fault. But look at her life and realize if this was what was the mantra of her life, only do what your heart tells you, we can see where that led. This is how the world has trained us to think. And frankly, this is true for Christians, right? I'm not just talking about what unsaved people, unbelievers think. I'm talking about as Christians. The world has taught us to think this way. Follow your heart. Do what your heart says. Listen to your heart. But God's word teaches the exact opposite thing. Solomon doesn't say follow your heart. Here's what he says. Guide your heart. There in verse 19. Guide your heart. Your heart needs to be led. Your heart needs to have boundaries set. I think about what Job said. The book of Job, I think it's chapter 31. Job said this, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. But you understand, this wasn't really about Job's eyes. He was concerned about his heart. So he set a boundary. He set a boundary in order to lead his heart to the right place so that he did not give in to temptation, to lust, and sin against God. Job said, I've made a covenant. I've already bound my heart with a constraint because I know it needs to be led. I know it needs to be guided. What does it mean to guide your heart? Well, it goes hand in hand with listening to your father. That's what verse 19 says. Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. See, here's what a father understands that his son might not yet fully appreciate. What is it? Well, it's this, that we have a tendency to take God's good gifts and abuse them. And so this is why he focuses in verses 20 and 21 on mixing with heavy drinkers and gluttons. These are people who are living for sensual pleasure, right? There are always going to be people around you who tell you, just do what feels good. That's how you need to live your life. If it feels good, do it. Follow your heart. Give in to your natural desires. They'll say, the heart knows what the heart wants. So just, give it. But this is what happens, right? Instead of accepting wine and meat as good gifts from God, gifts intended to give you pleasure, they turn these things into idols. You see, what happens is when you drink and you eat without restraint, which is what he's talking about here. Wine bibbers are heavy drinkers, and gluttons are those who eat without restraint. He says when you do that, when you eat and drink without restraint, you become a slave to wine and to food. God meant these things to give you pleasure. These are good things. But what happens, and this is the problem that we run into, the pleasure becomes the end in itself, right? We drink wine because God made wine to give us pleasure, so we do that, but then the pleasure becomes the end. We eat meat because it's enjoyable, and we eat, and then but the pleasure of it becomes an end in and of itself. And now I'm just seeking after that pleasure again and again. You seek more and more of it until before long, and you can see this transition. from verse 20 to verse 21. You mix with these people, and then by verse 21, you become a drunkard and a glutton yourself. Someone who completely lacks self-control and serves the gifts rather than the good God who created those. Remember, he created them for you to enjoy. But pretty soon we begin to be enslaved to the thing, to the gift, to the pleasure that it brings, rather than recognizing the goodness of God in it. Now, the temptation for young people is to just dismiss your parents altogether. After all, what do they know? They're old and weak, slow-moving and slow-thinking. What's especially troubling today, I think, is how our culture supports this kind of thinking. Our entire education system, for example, is built on the assumption that parents don't really know what's best. And what we need is a professional class of educators to counteract the biases of the home. And this is the language that's used today. Children and parents are pitted against each other. And the professionals are the ones that put themselves in between. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not against education and I'm not against schools. I'm not for a one-size-fits-all approach to this. When it comes to that kind of the question, school, public school, private school, homeschool, whatever, no school, I don't know. That's not what I'm getting at here. But the Bible is very clear on this point. The parents are ultimately responsible for the education and upbringing of their children. That's a parent's responsibility. Parents are accountable. Listen, it's parents, it's not educators. It's not the professional class. It's not the government. It's parents who are responsible to instill godly virtues and biblical values in our children. What is a biblical value system? Well, Solomon gives us a bit of his measuring stick here in verse 23. He says, buy the truth and do not sell it. This is the kind of value system that we as parents need to be instilling in our children. Buy the truth and don't sell it. Also, wisdom and instruction and understanding. Think of truth and wisdom like investments. Now, if you want to lose money, I can tell you how to do it. Buy some investments and then work really hard to try and time the stock market. Make sure you make the right moves at the right time, and it's a good way to lose all your money. Trying to buy low and sell high every move. Right? You can't predict the future. You're going to fail. What we've seen that succeeds, though, when it comes to investment is what? You buy and you hold on to it for the long haul and you watch it grow. That's what Solomon is telling us to do here. He's saying truth, wisdom, insight, understanding. Buy these things. And then they go in your never sell folder. You buy them and you sit on them. And you hold those investments. And as long as you live, you hold on to truth and wisdom and insight and understanding. And there's no price point where you would ever sell them. They keep on paying dividends. In fact, this is important. Wisdom and truth and insight and understanding, these are things that pay dividends. They're investments that don't just benefit you, they benefit your children and your grandchildren for generations if we hold on to them. We don't let them go. And so Solomon is telling us here, this is how we need to approach our hearts. We need to have this value system and guide our hearts into it. To love what is true and to hold on to it. Now, there's a lot more that I could say, but I need to move on. There's another principle here. And this one's probably the hardest one. I can put it a couple different ways, but here's how I put it on the screen. Trust your Father with your heart. Trust your Father with your heart. Look with me there, verse 26. He says, my son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways. For a harlot is a deep pit, and a seductress is a narrow well. She also lies in wait as for a victim and increases the unfaithful among men. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things and your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies at the top of the mast, saying, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake that I may seek another drink? Shortly after the birth of our first child, my father-in-law gave me a .22 rifle that had belonged to his father. And he told me this was for Michael. Now, I could have taken that rifle and I could have just laid it in Michael's crib and said, it's his. Who am I to interfere with this? This is his. It belongs to him now. I shouldn't hold on to it. Well, that's not responsible parenting. You don't hand a firearm to a child and say, here, have at it, kid. No. As his father, it's my job to protect him from harm, but it's also my job to train him to handle adult responsibility so that he can have that rifle. And it will be a blessing to him and not a curse. That's what Solomon does here in verse 26 with his son's heart. He says, my son, give me your heart. It's as if he's saying to him, son, your heart is so precious. It's so important. It's too dangerous for you to control it when you're small. Instead, let me have it. I'll hold on to it for you. I'll keep it safe until you're ready. This reminds me of a passage from Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place. Maybe you've read it before. She asked her father to explain what sexual sin was. She was just a child. She must have heard an expression about it. And here's what she says. He turned to look at me, as he always did when answering a question. But to my surprise, he said nothing. At last, he stood up, lifted his traveling case, and set it on the floor. Will you carry it off the train, Corrie, he said. I stood up and tugged at it. It was crammed with the watches and spare parts he had purchased that morning. It's too heavy, I said. Yes, he said. And it would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you're older and stronger, you can bear it. For now, you must trust me to carry it for you. Trust me to carry it for you, he said. This is a father saying to his daughter, give me your heart. I'm going to hold on to it for you. It's interesting to me that the question that Corrie asked about was a question of sexual sin, because that's the thing that Solomon starts with here. Right after he warns his son, right after he asks his son to give him his heart. That's what he warns him about. Listen, we as fathers must know the power of these temptations, the destruction that comes if our children get caught foolishly in the trap of the immoral man or woman. Notice how Solomon describes this woman. He says she's a deep pit and a narrow well. It's a really interesting imagery here. Because wells especially in the land of Israel, desert place like that, are very valuable. If you have a well that produces water that doesn't go dry, and that is especially valuable. You can water your flocks, you can irrigate your fields, you can quench your own thirst. That is a valuable treasure in that desert land, to have a well. And Solomon says, well, this woman, she's a well, but you won't get satisfaction from this well. In fact, she's a narrow well. When you go down this well, you'll get stuck. You'll get trapped. Lust and immorality may appear to be life-giving, but they're not. You fall into this well and you will get stuck. Constrained is the imagery here. When I was young, I don't remember exactly how old I was. It was I remember a pretty dramatic rescue of a young girl that fell down a well. The whole country was watching on TV. And they brought out this machinery and dug this whole well out so they could get her out of this well, and she got stuck in. I think her name was Jessica. That's off the top of my head. This little baby girl. I remember it being a big story. But that's what he's saying here, right? This is a narrow constraint. Imagine it. If you're claustrophobic, don't imagine too hard, okay? I don't want you to have a panic attack here. But you get down this well, and it gets narrower and narrower and tighter and tighter and tighter. And before long, you can't go forward, you can't go back. You're just stuck, and you can't move at all. Completely constrained. That's what he says this is like. He says, you get involved in immorality. You get involved in a man or a woman. You get involved in some sort of sexual immorality. This is what it is. It's constraint. It's like being trapped in that well and stuck. This woman offers, what does she offer? She offers the prospect of pleasure and satisfaction. She says, I'll give it freely. You can drink as much as you want and you'll be satisfied. But the reality is, she only produces frustration. This woman cannot provide real intimacy. This is true whether this is a flesh and blood woman or a woman on a screen somewhere. This cannot provide real intimacy. This cannot provide real satisfaction. No, it's constraining. It's frustrating. It's limiting. In the end, you'll be trapped. I think of Samson, the mighty warrior. Samson, who kills the Philistine soldiers by the thousands. Samson, who takes the gates of a city. We're not talking about the front door of your house here. We're talking about massive 8, 9, 10-foot, solid, thick wooden gates designed to stop, horses and chariots from getting through. He rips these gates up and carries them on his shoulders. This is the strength of Solomon, or of Samson, rather. Listen to what Ambrose, pastor in the 4th century in the city of Milan, he put it very bluntly. Here's what he said about Samson. This is just, he nails it. Samson broke the bonds of his enemies, but he could not break the bonds of his own lusts. Samson choked the lion, but he could not choke his own wanton love. Samson's temptation and his involvement with sexual immorality was his undoing. It destroyed him. Literally, it ended up destroying his life. Ruined. Fathers, dads, you know the potential of this temptation. You know how easy it is for a young man or young woman to be captured by this. So don't sit idly by and let your sons and daughters play around with fire. You, dads, guide their hearts. Let them watch you do battle. This is what I think is profound. He says in verse 25 or 26, my son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. Dads, you got to show your kids how to do this. You got to show your kids, let them see you do battle with the flesh. Let them see you do battle against sin and temptation. And they will know how seriously this battle must be fought. And if you're a young man or young woman, if you're a child here this morning, you may think it's not a big deal. You can handle this. Don't be a fool. Listen to Solomon and give your heart to your Father. Now, it's not just the temptation of lust that we need to be protected from as young people. Solomon closes this chapter with an extended discussion on the dangers of being enthralled with wine. Who has woe, he says. Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? These questions just building. What's the answer? What's the answer to the riddle? Who's the one person that fits all of these categories? That's the person who lingers long at the wine, he says, who goes out and searches for it. He's not talking here about somebody who has a drink. He's talking about somebody who this becomes their life. This becomes their recreation. This becomes the thing they live for. One of the things that social media has given us is it's given us competition over which country in the world drinks the most alcohol. And you know which country it is? It's Wisconsin. Okay? It is. Wisconsin beats every other place in the entire world. And it's not even close. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It's not close. I've seen the charts. I've seen the statistics. It's essentially a joke, making light of the fact that people in Wisconsin can't really have any sort of social gathering that isn't centered on alcohol and drinking. Now, I'm not going on a teetotaling rant here. I don't even think that's what Solomon's suggesting here. We have to recognize the danger, though, especially for young people. And because the issue is, and what Solomon's pointing at here is, young people especially are susceptible because they're already predisposed to more risky behavior. Then, when you establish here and you begin to get involved in a lifestyle of drinking, a lifestyle of recreational drinking and the pursuit of wine and alcohol as a recreation, that's what this is talking about here. That tends to lower your inhibitions and lead to behavior and choices that you're unlikely to participate in sober. And for young people, this is especially dangerous. Now, the danger here isn't so much what the first drink leads to as much as it's what a life given over to alcohol looks like. And so he gives kind of three illustrative warnings here. The first is, he says, it's like a deadly serpent in verse 32. I mean, we're not one of those churches that passes around snakes, you know. No interest in that whatsoever, okay? Not only is it bad theology, but it's just stupid, all right? I have no interest in, I'm not afraid of snakes. I just don't have any interest in handling them, right? It's not my thing, especially not venomous snakes. Nobody would volunteer to get bitten by a snake, right? Not anybody sane anyways. And yet, that's what Solomon is saying. To the young person especially, but anybody who would go after this, who would linger long, who would make this a major part of their life and recreation. It's like volunteering to get bitten by a snake. If you handle snakes, don't be surprised when it bites you. Right? And if you handle deadly snakes, don't be surprised if you die. When I was growing up, our kindergarten teacher at the grade school that I went to, her son was really into snakes, and he had a big collection, a lot of venomous snakes. He even had a couple of cobras. And I remember talking to her about it, and she was saying, and this was not when I was little, but a little later on, and she was saying, that the veterinarian would come and provide care to the snakes, but he wouldn't provide care to the cobras because he didn't have access to the antivenom. And he says, if I get bit by one of them, I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to risk it. I won't even touch them. Okay? Well, I think that's probably smart. Solomon says, if you make it a habit of indulging in alcohol and you pursue wine and you make this your lifestyle, you're asking to get bit by a deadly serpent. You're inviting it. How foolish. The second thing he warns about here is a hallucination. He talks about your eyes seeing strange or grotesque things, and then your mouth and your heart uttering perverse things. He says your mind is going to conjure up all sorts of things, and some of those things are going to come out of your mouth. You're going to say and do things that you would not otherwise do. I think especially in an honor and shame culture like that which Solomon is writing in, the idea that you might inadvertently shame your family because you would say or do things that would bring shame on your family was a major, major issue. We don't have that same kind of culture, so it doesn't resonate with us the same way. I remember when I was in high school, a coworker talking to me about his going out drinking and partying on the weekend, and he was telling me all about his escapades, about getting violently sick, and how hilarious it was. He was laughing and thought it was great. And I remember just sitting there thinking, that doesn't sound fun to me at all. I don't want anything to do with that. That just sounds stupid. Why? Why would you want to do that? But Solomon says this is what happens, right? When you indulge in this, you lose control of your mind. You'll see things. They may or may not be real. Your heart will produce all sorts of things. And some of those things will come out of your mouth. This is what will become reality to you. Because you're constantly inebriated. And the third thing he says here, it's like sleeping in the middle of the ocean. I just can't imagine anything more absurd. Or at the top of a mast of a ship, lying down to sleep. You put yourself in danger, but you're completely insensitive to the danger. You have no awareness of the danger that you're in, right? Because you've given over complete control to the substance here. You don't even feel the danger. All of this Solomon is warning against here. Going backward, he says, son, give me your heart. Now, someone might object to that. When Solomon says, give me your heart, we have a theological objection here. Shouldn't we give our hearts to God? Shouldn't we give our hearts to God? Shouldn't Solomon say, son, give your heart to God, instead of saying, son, give me your heart? Why would Solomon or any father ask his son to give him something that belongs to God? Well, it's a good question. And I'll close with this. But let me just say it this way. If you are a father, or if you hope to become a father someday, listen. Solomon can say this because Solomon is speaking by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He is speaking on behalf of God when he says, son, give me your heart. He is standing, as it were, in the place of God and appealing to his son. And if you and I will receive Solomon's words, if we will apply them to our hearts, if we will let them be fixed on our lips, then we can stand in the place of God before our sons and our daughters, and we can say, give me your heart. Not that we become gods to them, but we can speak words of wisdom to them with divine authority. If our children will incline their ears, if you, young people here today, if all of us today will incline our ears and apply our hearts to wisdom, lead our hearts in the truth, not follow them, if we'll give our hearts to our Father, to hold them and direct them in truth, then we will become wise. Solomon says, if your children do this, then you as a father and mother will dance with joy because your children will demonstrate wisdom. And what could make you more happy? What could make you more joyful? Solomon says that nothing. He says, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. John says the same kind of thing in 3 John, verse 4. He says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. We have a responsibility here as fathers and mothers, as children. We have a responsibility before the Lord and responsibility to one another. Let's pray and ask the Lord to help us take that seriously and respond as we should.